London hides many secrets, but this one was never meant to be found. Welcome to Silent Case Files. I am your host, Pendleton. Tell me, where are you tuning in from tonight? Your comments make every mystery come alive. Now, let's begin the case. It was close upon 5 o'clock on a grey March morning when the clatter of wheels broke the uneasy stillness of Baker Street. Dr. Watson, who had abandoned sleep as the wind fretted the casement, and the fire sank to ruddy embers, rose from his chair and drew aside the curtain. A hansom had pulled sharply to the curb. From it sprang a short, spare figure in a travelling ulster, his gloved hand already lifted to our bell. A moment later, Inspector Lestrade stood upon our rug, the gust behind him strewing a flurry of soot and sleet across the tiles. "Mr. Holmes," said he, nodding to me with that practised civility which his long acquaintance with my friend had taught him, "I beg your pardon for the hour, but there is mischief afoot, and the yard is in need." Holmes, who had not been to bed at all but lay at length upon the sofa, his eyes fastened upon the smoke wreaths of his pipe, indicated a chair by the hearth with a listless motion. "Pray be seated, Lestrade. When you favour us at this hour, it is seldom on a trifling matter. You are wet from the right shoulder, the cab leaked above you, and you have left your man waiting below with orders to take the Addison Road line at a moment's notice, so your business lies underground this morning." Lestrade permitted himself the ghost of a smile that was not unmixed with annoyance. "It is the devil's own puzzle underground, Mr. Holmes. A gentleman is dead in a manner that no man at the yard cares to put a name to. The contractors, the commissioners, and half the city will have our heads if we do not mend it quickly." Holmes turned his dark gaze upon the inspector. "State it plainly." Lestrade, who never wasted words, did so. A body was found before dawn in one of the new tunnel drifts off the Fleet Valley Works near the old riverbed. The night watchman discovered him lying where no honest man should be at that hour. The drift was locked from the exterior and sealed beyond with a second gate. No tool marks on the fastenings, no sign of a struggle. There is not so much as a proper footprint to guide us. He has no papers about him, only a railway ticket to Blackfriars and a sovereign purse untouched. We think the fellow was the civil engineer Sir Julius Fortescue. "Fortescue?" I cried. "Surely you mean Sir Julius Fortescue of the Metropolitan Works. The name is known to every reader of the dailies." "The same," Lestrade returned. "He left a dinner at his club a little after midnight, witnessed by at least 6 gentlemen. He was said to be anxious, though he remarked nothing of consequence, and he took a cab south. No one saw him again until the watchman roused us at 4. Sir Julius lies dead, on clay that has not seen the sun for centuries, and the door to that clay was locked on our side." Holmes's thin lips compressed. He rose, set his pipe upon the mantel, and passed to the window. "You say he lies in the drift, an exploratory gallery?" "Aye, narrow and low, about 30 yards in from the heading, and not yet braced with timbers. It was shut up last evening for fear of seepage. The nightmen swear they never opened it." "And the cause of death?" Lestrade tugged at his cuff, uneasy. "That is the worst of it. There is no wound, no blood, no bruise that counts. His face shows, a sort of pallor I do not care to see again, and the surgeon we fetched can make nothing of it. There is a smell in that place, Mr. Holmes, like lime pits and damp stone after a storm, that turns a man's stomach, but nothing to lay hold of." Holmes's eye had taken on that glassy brightness which I knew boded action. "You bring news that will not bear delay." He glanced about for his coat. "Watson, your boots. Lestrade, have your cabman remain. We shall require a lantern, and if you value the integrity of your evidence, a promise that no man shall stir that drift until I have seen it." "You shall have both," said Lestrade stoutly. "I told the overseer to keep his navvies well back. They don't like the place as it is." Men rarely take to being made confidants of the earth, Holmes murmured, drawing on his greatcoat. The subterranean air plays tricks upon the imagination. As we descended, the cold met us with a sting that braced and chastened. The inspector climbed in after us, and the hansom jolted away, its iron-shod wheels biting into the half-frozen ruts. Dawn was a smear of pewter over the housetops. Milk carts and a few yawning apprentices were the only souls abroad. We made quickly for the river, where the city's younger sinews, iron, brick and steam, were being thrust beneath its skin. Lestrade leaned forward in the cab's well to be heard above the rattle. "There's talk, Mr. Holmes, that Sir Julius meant to halt works on the Fleet section for a fortnight. He'd complained to the Board of Foul Air and Strange Seepage. The board answered with figures and schedules. His enemies," here Lestrade gave a short cough, "are not few. Contracts of this sort throw up as many grudges as bricks." "And yet he was found inside the very drift he wished to close," Holmes said. "How curious that a man should seek in the dark that which he feared in the light." The inspector shrugged. "Curious or not, there's your fact." We turned off the Strand and found the worksite alive with lanterns, even at that bleak hour. Broad-shouldered men in moleskins stood at the perimeter, caps in hand, while a foreman with a voice like gravel strove to hold them to order. There was, too, a nervous sprinkling of gentlemen, the sort who wear their authority like stiff collars, conversing in low and heated tones. Our arrival drew every eye and not a few whispers, for the face of Sherlock Holmes was by then a near public property. A short, choleric man introduced himself as Mr. Barstow, chief contractor for the section, and endeavoured to bar our way with his indignation. Lestrade brushed him aside with the cool authority of the yard. Holmes, for his part, bestowed on the gentleman a glance of such transparent indifference that the man's protests died of themselves. We were provided lanterns, and with Lestrade leading, descended by a timber stair into the heading. The air grew colder and more saturated. The smell of newly cut clay and brackish damp replaced the city's smoke. From above, the constant hum of London dwindled to a faint throb. It seemed to me, as I placed my boots upon the planks, that we trod not merely into the earth, but into a hush older than the street and stones we had left. At the mouth of the drift, a gate of iron bars had been swung back and padlocked the previous evening. So the foreman averred. The lock was now open, key still lodged in place, and behind it a second set of timbers, newly erected and intact. Between these two barriers lay the narrow throat through which we must pass. "None of the men touched him," Lestrade whispered, as if the dome of clay above us required reverence. We did not like the look of him. We fetched Dr. Hartley, and he threw up his hands. By the wavering light I saw the figure of a man stretched upon the damp clay. He lay upon his side, the arm crooked under the head, as if he had composed himself for sleep. A good head of iron-grey hair, a clean-shaven jaw, and features that were refined to the point of delicacy bore out the inspector's identification. The clothing, too, the heavy evening coat, the satin cravat, the polished boots, dulled by clay, spoke of a gentleman of station. His eyes were open. There was upon his mouth that peculiar compression which I have seen in certain forms of sudden expiration. Holmes went upon one knee at the dead man's shoulder and held his lantern low, so that the light slid over clay, cloth and bone with an unpitying intimacy. He did not touch the body. His gaze moved like a needle, the collar, the cuffs, the nails, the hem. Then, with the least motion of his long fingers, he indicated a small, dull fleck upon the dead man's left cuff. "Pray observe, Watson." It was a grain or two of something pale caught in the nap, lighter than the clay upon which he lay. Holmes motioned again to the dead man's right boot, where the edge of the sole bore a film of fine greyish powder, unlike the ochre smear of the drift. And here, he shifted his lantern to the timber upright, where, at a height somewhat below a man's chest, there showed the faintest crescentic mark, darker than the surrounding wood, as if some small circular object, damp or greased, had rested there for a moment. Lastly, he held the light to the dead man's hand. Between the first and second fingers a narrow strip of paper had been crushed and sweated into the skin. With the point of his penknife, he teased it free. It proved to be a fragment of a railway timetable folded into a neat dart with a pencil line scored firmly beneath the hour 12:37. Holmes regarded it for a heartbeat only and passed it up to me. "Pray keep that safe." Then to Lestrade, "You say the lock was closed?" "As you see it now, with the key in it." "We had to open it to get a proper look." "And who had charge of that key?" "The watchman, a steady old veteran name of Peake. He swears he never quitted his stool between 1 and 4. Holmes's eyes, those instruments of his peculiar genius, passed again to the pale powder upon the sole and cuff. "There are 2 questions that govern this matter: how Sir Julius came here, and why he came at all. One speaks to mechanism, the other to motive. The mechanism will not suffer delay. I must have the exact condition of the gate when it was first observed, the state of the clay outside. No one has trodden on that patch, and the lantern positions as they stood an hour past." Lestrade signalled the foreman, who swore that no foot had crossed the drift's threshold since the body was discovered. Holmes crouched at the lip and held his lantern so near the clay that it seemed to drink the light. There, upon the smooth surface, I perceived a series of small, shallow depressions, scarcely more than the ghosts of prints, as if some wide, flat-soled instrument had been pressed softly and withdrawn. Holmes nodded once, as if at a proposition he had been expecting. He raised his lantern higher, and the flame briefly licked a rib of timber above us. "Curious," he murmured. "Watson, do you remark the faint discoloration along that beam? The vapour from our breath condenses upon the cool wood, but there is a second film, sticky to the eye, if not to the finger. Lestrade, have you had any tarred rope down here in the last 12 hours? "Tar? No. Lime, certainly. There's been talk of using it to sweeten the seepage." "And the seepage smells," Holmes said softly, "like a storm in close weather." Lestrade shivered, though the cold was not malignant. "Call it what you please, Mr. Holmes. I call it nasty." Holmes rose with the controlled energy that was always more impressive in him than any flourish. "Nasty, yes, but nastier still is the mind that planned this. Sir Julius Fortescue did not come to the Fleet Valley drift by chance. He was brought to it by the hand of a man who knew the strata of London as well as he knew the passions of men. There is art in this, misguided art." "You can make head or tail of it, then?" Lestrade demanded, though his tone said he did not believe it. "I can make a beginning," Holmes answered. He looked once more at the dead man, then at the lock, and finally at the faint crescent stain upon the upright. "Have your constable stand watch and admit no one without my leave. I shall require a word with your watchman Peake, a look at Sir Julius's club book for last night, and, when we are done here, 10 minutes in the open air. The brain, like a lamp, smokes if kept too long below ground." He turned to me with a brief smile that warmed even that forbidding place. "Come, Watson, the game, it seems, does not always begin in a drawing-room. This one chooses to make its first move under London's shadows." And with that we left the sleeping figure in the clay and the dark, damp hush of the drift, to return to a city stirring to life above a deadly secret. The watchman, a spare, elderly fellow, with a face as corrugated as old oak, and a moustache cut to a grey bristle, awaited us at the foot of the stair with his cap wrung flat in his hands. Holmes's glance took him in as one appraises a signboard, the battered boots carefully cleaned at the toes, the polished buttons, the tea-stain dark upon the right cuff only, and the minute scorch upon the forefinger that bespoke a man who coaxed life from matches held too close. "You are Peake," Holmes said quietly. "You have kept these works through 2 winters and take pride in your steadiness. Your failing, such as it is a fondness for strong tea and a pipe that is forever on the point of extinction." The old fellow's watery eyes widened. "Why, sir?" Holmes brushed past apology. "You sat your stool from 1 until 4? "As God sees me, sir," Peake returned, touching his brow. "The gentleman in the office had me note down the quarter hours, and I did so." "You wrote by the lamp?" "The little oil lamp at the door, the big lantern I keeps for rounds." "You made no round between 1 and 4? Peake's mouth worked. "No, sir. There were orders not to quit the stool, only the scuffling of rats and a draught or 2. It's no place for wandering, that drift." Holmes turned to the gate with the open lock and the key that dangled from it, its iron tongue still caked with old grime. He lifted it delicately and sniffed at the ward. "When did you last oil this?" "Why, yester evening, sir, for fear of rust." "With what?" "The contractor's grease, sir. It sits in a tin in the office. We are to keep the locks clean, Mr. Barstow says." Holmes's eye flicked to the faint crescent mark upon the timber upright within. He set his long fingers lightly against it. The stickiness clung and made a thread in the lamplight. "Your grease leaves a trace most indefinite. This leaves a haste in the hand. It is not the same. Where did you place your lantern when you first came upon the body?" Peake pointed to a notch in a lower strut, a shoulder's height, to me, but below the discoloration Holmes had noted. "There, sir. It's a mark I made with my knife to steady it." "And before that?" "Where stood the lanterns for work?" The foreman answered from behind, reluctant to intrude. "At the mouth, Mr. Holmes. We do not set flame farther in, not with the seepage." Holmes knelt once again, just within the threshold, so that his knees sank imperceptibly into the smooth clay. "No farther in," he repeated, "and yet Sir Julius lies 20 feet yonder, with dust upon his cuff that is not of this bed, and powder upon his boot sole that is not of this hue. Peake, your key hung where last night?" The watchman swallowed. "Upon a nail by my elbow, sir. I have the copy, and Mr. Barstow the master." "Ah, a copy," Holmes murmured, and rose. "Did any man stand at your door within the hour after 1? Peake stared stubbornly into his cap. "Mr. Hartley, the surgeon, and 2 constables. Their times you have. Before the alarm, none. Save—" He hesitated. "Save?" The old fellow looked miserable. "A messenger boy, sir, a slip of a lad in a tarred cap. He asked the way to the office to leave a note. I sent him above. He never came down again." Holmes's expression did not alter, but there came into it the tautness of a bowstring drawn. "Describe him." "Common, sir. With a cold upon him." He sniffed. Holmes's nostrils, so thin and eager, dilated like those of a hound. "And you, Peake, you have the room yourself today, but yesterday you had not." "You took the boy's cold. It was not the air." "I did take a bit of a chill," Peake admitted. "Draughts run queer under London." Holmes turned abruptly from him. "Watson, the print at the threshold. Note how the depressions widen at the heel. No nail-head shows, no heel nail at all. There are boards upon boards. Our visitor came shod in pattens, broad soles strapped over shoe leather, to cheat the clay and leave no mark." He paused at the upright and set something round upon it for a breath. "A canister? A lamp? The stain is of a grease that will not answer to mere oil. Lestrade, who had kept his impatience in check with visible effort, ventured, "We can send to the yard to learn if any messenger was dispatched." "Pray do so, but I would wager a week's fees that no such boy comes forward," Holmes replied. He drew from his pocket a little lens and examined the pale specks upon the dead man's cuff. "This is no pure lime. It is a Roman cement, finely ground, quick to set upon contact with damp air. It would take the print of a thumb before hardening, which is why it lies in grains only, shaken free when a sleeve brushed the mixing box." "And what does that tell you?" Lestrade challenged. "That Sir Julius's sleeve brushed that box within the hour of his death," Holmes answered calmly. "And the mixing box is above, not below. He did not sink out of some banquet into this place as an opium-eater sinks into dreams. He came by design through air that had already made terms with poison." A little shiver ran through me. The odour of the drift, which had seemed a mere inconvenience, acquired a sinister cast under Holmes's words. "Poison!" Lestrade exclaimed. "We found no phial." "Not the sort a man carries," Holmes said. "The sort a man breathes." He straightened, and for a moment the lamp tremble made a second Holmes ghostly behind the first. "Enough of graves! We require air!" We emerged into the bluish daylight as a diver pops from a bad depth, lungs eager, eyes smarting. Holmes stood with his back to the wind, drawing long, measured breaths until a portion of the underground's hold relinquished him. Then he turned, his face already once more composed, to thought, to Mr. Barstow, who hovered within earshot like a wasp near a jam-pot. "You keep 2 keys," he said without preamble, "one with pique, one upon your person." Barstow bristled. "Naturally." "You are left-handed," Holmes continued, glancing at the man's right cuff, stained and frayed where it rubbed at chalkboards, and the flexing of his left hand. "You overoil your locks, you distrust petty theft, you employ boys to carry notes, and you do not trust men out of your sight who are not hired by you. All very proper. Tell me, Mr. Barstow, does the fleet run sweet just now, or does it carry the stink of the week's refuse?" Barstow glared. "What is that to the matter?" "Everything. There are hours when the old river pushes, and hours when it ebbs. The board may give you figures, the fleet gives you facts. At what hour last night would the stink be least, when the tide had turned?" Barstow forced his lips thin. "Near 12:30. What of it?" Holmes glanced at me, and I knew he thought of the underlined 12:37. "What of it indeed?" he said. "Does Sir Julius's club lie in the path to Blackfriars?" "Aye." "Then we shall have the club book," Holmes concluded, "and we shall have word with any man who saw Sir Julius between midnight and 1. Lestrade, keep this ground as you would your own skin. Admit no man with a canister, a coil of hose, or a conscience too clean. Peak, if you love your lungs, warm them above for an hour before you return to that stool." We secured a hansom and drove across the awakening town. The light strengthened to a dull pewter, as if the sky were a spoon left in yesterday's basin. Holmes said little. Once only he remarked, in that tone of detached observation, which in him took the place of idle talk, "The human frame, Watson, is so obligingly built to exhale at each moment the evidence of its owner's history that it is a perpetual affront to mystery. When mystery persists, it is because a man has exchanged his exhalations for another's." "At the club," I ventured, "you hope to learn whether Sir Julius met someone?" "Or avoided someone," Holmes returned. "An absence can be as vocal as a presence. The hour underlined upon that scrap, 12:37, coincides with a slack water in one sense and a change of guard in another. Who profits from both? The porter at Sir Julius's club was a creased, dignified relic, with a heart as regulated as the timepiece he kept upon a chain. He recognized Lestrade and bowed us towards the ledger. Holmes's forefinger ran down the last page like a violin bow. There it was. Fortescue entered at 9:12, dined alone, took coffee at 11:40, left at 12:21. A straight, decisive hand had marked the hours. Beneath his exit was a note in a different hand. Message delivered, 12:25, E.H. "Who is E.H.?" Holmes asked, without lifting his eyes. "Mr. Edwin Harcourt, sir," the porter answered. "Junior secretary of the Metropolitan Board, who sometimes leaves us notes for Sir Julius. He is a member." "Do we know the content of that message?" The porter's face arranged itself into the proper regret. "We do not, sir. The boy brought it. Sir Julius read it without a change, save that he called for his hat at once and went down to the steps as if he feared to lose the man who waits when you keep him too long." "Did he call a cab?" "Yes, sir. He said, 'Blackfriars,' in a tone as if he had said, 'My grave.'" Holmes's mouth curved without mirth. "You have a poet's ear, my good fellow. It may be of use to the living." He closed the ledger with a soft clap. "We will not trespass upon your dignity by inquiring after the quality of the coffee. Tell me only this. Did Mr. Harcourt remain in the smoking room after Sir Julius left?" "He did," the porter said. "He sat with a gentleman I do not know, a stranger with a scar like a comma before the ear." Holmes's eyes brightened. "A comma, eh? I have seen punctuation on a man's flesh lead to paragraphs of consequence." He turned to Lestrade. "We shall require Mr. Harcourt. If he be not at his desk, then find him where commas are to be had." "And where do we go now?" I asked, when we had reached the pavement once more. "Now?" Holmes looked back along the street, as if the thin line of a thought ran there and might be plucked like wire. "Now we go to the river. We will see what the fleet swallowed at 12:30, and what it belched out again." Blackfriars lay under a pall of sullen vapour when we reached the river. The early coal barges slid like black thoughts beneath the arches, and the outfall of the hidden fleet showed as a low, iron-lipped mouth streaked with whitish efflorescence, breathing a faint, corrupt chill into the morning. Holmes mounted the slimy steps with the sure-footedness of a cat, and stood a moment measuring the stain lines left by the night's turning water, as a general might study the disposition of an enemy. "Observe, Watson," he said, indicating with his cane a band an inch wide that gleamed more dully than the stone about it. A ring left by a body that sweats oil when brought from warmer quarters to this chill. If you pass a cylinder from a cellar to a riverside, the cold will draw its moisture in a film that prints as surely as ink. "You speak of a cylinder," I returned, peering. The mark, when once my attention was fixed, was plain enough, a shallow arc upon the stone coping, and beside it a smear where some greasy substance had been hastily wiped with a rough cloth. "You believe one was brought here?" "I think two were," Holmes answered. "One rested there, note the length, and a second, lighter perhaps, lay a hand's breadth beyond. See also the ridged impressions on the steps. Not the iron rims of a tradesman's barrow, but the broader, rope-bound wheels of a hired porter's truck. And here?" With his nail he lifted what I had taken for a mere grit from the mortared joint. A flake of stenciled paint, grey upon black. The letters are too small for the naked eye, but the type is of a contractor's mark. Let us not ask the river to give up more than a letter. It does not love to be read. He replaced the flake in his envelope with that fastidious care he bestowed upon all unhandsome treasures, then descended the last steps to the very lip of the outfall. The air there had the sour-sweet tang of old hollows and rot. Holmes drew a slow breath, held it, and exhaled as if testing the draught from an opened window. "Less stench now than at Slackwater," he said. A prudent man who wished to adventure in the drifts without overwhelming his accomplice would choose the minute when the fleet's foulness relaxed. Our underlined our suits. Now what passes from here to the works can pass also in reverse. A hose, Watson, rubberized canvas, tacky with a tar-like preservative, hence our crescent, upon the upright, when a valve head rested a moment during some adjustment. The stain inside is of such a dressing, not of a locksmith's grease. With a cylinder and hose, a man may bring air to a place, and he may bring what passes for air when one intends another result. Lestrade, who had followed us with a grimace of distaste, gave a grudging nod. "You talk of poisoned air, then?" "I talk of air that takes oxygen from the blood without so much as asking the body's leave," Holmes returned. "The lungs draw it as trustfully as a babe draws milk, and the heart, deceived, slows without defence. The pallor on Sir Julius's face, the lack of struggle, the absence of a gross lesion—" He waved his hand. "But theory is insolence until it stoops to fact. Let us have facts." He put his lens again to work upon the coping and the worn flags of the quay. Presently he grunted softly and indicated a thread so fine that my eyes found it only when his finger anchored it. Red twine, no thicker than a violin string, kinked as if it had been cut against a metal edge. "This, Watson, binds the folded plans issued by the board," he observed. "I have seen their clerks secure the corners with such twine, which they snip with the same little nickel shears that leave a burr like this. The colour is particular, a board, vanity, a cylinder. Our hose and our plan twine have kept company upon these stones since the tide turned." "Then we have them!" cried Lestrade. "Harcourt, the board's man, sent the message and sent the truck." "Or a man who wished Harcourt's name to ride as passenger upon his contrivance," Holmes said. "We shall see which. Come, mudlarks know what official memory misses." He hailed a boy who had been watching us with that bold, ancient stare peculiar to the river's children. The little savage came with a slither, his bare toes clinging to the green steps. Holmes, whose way with such waifs was as deft as with princes, put a coin in his palm and a question in his ear. "Did you see a porter's truck here after midnight?" The boy nodded with relish. "Two gents, sir. One had a cap like tar with the brim broke. They rolled a round black thing down, a proper weight it were. One says, 'Mind the letters,' and t'other says, 'No one's got eyes, you fool, not at this hour.' They come from the way o' the bridge, and they goes under it after." "What hour?" The boy scratched his tousled head. "When the bells was near the 1:30, sir. I was watchin' for a lighter." "You have earned your breakfast," Holmes said, and sent him off at a run with a peremptory wag of the cane that set the urchin laughing as he fled. "Mind the letters," Holmes repeated reflectively. "One does not mind letters upon a cylinder unless one has reason to fear they may be read. A contractor's stamp, then, not a gas-house mark. We shall not depend upon buoys and tide lines when paper can be made to speak." Lestrade to the board. The Metropolitan Board's offices gave the impression of order salted with pomp. Clerks moved like chessmen between tall presses. Mr. Edwin Harcourt, when at last he was shown to us, proved a lithe, fair young man with eyes discoloured by late hours and the short cough of a London winter. He affected a composure that did him credit, but the quick pulsing at his throat betrayed a lively uneasiness. "Inspector," he said, with the air of one who finds the police an indelicate necessity. "Mr. Holmes, I was told Sir Julius that he had met with an accident." You left him a message at 12:25, Holmes began, very bland. Be so good as to repeat it. Harcourt's lids flickered. How? Well, yes. I sent him a note by a boy to the club. It concerned a revision to the schedule for the fleet section. Sir Julius had expressed doubts, very inconvenient doubts, and the chairman desired him to see certain figures at once. He was impetuous and very capable of halting a day's work upon a scruple. Your note asked him to go down to the works. It asked him to meet the chairman's agent at the Blackfriars office attached to the works, where the plans are kept at night for security, Harcourt said with a stiffness that did not disguise his dislike of the admission. Men are working always there. There is nothing improper in it. Mr. Harcourt, said Holmes with a mildness that made the young man's spine seem to tighten rather than relax, your board binds its plans with red twine. Would you be surprised to learn that such twine lay upon the quay this morning, kinked by your shears and cut where it had chafed against iron? I would not be surprised to learn that our plans are everywhere. Men are foolish, Harcourt retorted more hotly than prudence advised. The city buzzes with them. Every contractor demands to see, every member begs to be placated, and some gentlemen, he bit the word, pocket a plan as easily as a cigar. And you remained at the club after Sir Julius left, Holmes continued. You sat with a gentleman who bears a comma-shaped scar before his ear. Harcourt's pallor deepened. I sat with Mr. Mallows of Warriner and Larch, the engineering firm. He has a scar from a fall when he was a boy. He is an adviser to several members of the board upon technical points. Warriner and Larch supply cylinders to the works? Holmes asked, as if genuinely curious. They supply everything from bolts to boilers, Harcourt said tightly. If you are about to suggest— I suggest nothing, Holmes replied, but I will ask to see your message book. Harcourt produced it with reluctance. The duplicate of his note stood fair upon the page, the hour marked and initialed. Holmes's eye rested for a moment upon the neat, small hand. You underlined nothing, he said. You are not the man who underlines. That relief, at least, is yours. Harcourt caught at the table. Underlines? Mr. Holmes, if you mean the Yard has found a paper. We mean nothing that should cause you to forget yourself, Lestrade cut in, perhaps enjoying for a moment the authority that often ebbed away in Holmes's presence. You sent Sir Julius to a meeting at the works. With whom? Harcourt's gaze wavered. Mallow's man, a foreman named Pike, seconded to the fleet section from their gas-fitting division while the ventilators are set. Sir Julius respected his judgment in practical matters. Pike is rough, but able. Rough, Holmes repeated. Left-handed? Harcourt blinked. I cannot say. Then we shall of our own knowledge, Holmes said, closing the book with a soft finality. We thank you for your candour, such as it is. Do not leave your desk unless called. The young man opened his mouth, thought better of it, and bowed us out with a colourless twitch of the lips that was neither respect nor defiance. On the stairs, Holmes's step quickened by a fraction. Warriner and Larch, he mused, a comma beneath the ear, red twine upon a key, hose dressed with tar, a cylinder that sweats oil at the river's cold, and a foreman called Pike, whose calling concerns air that burns but also air that kills. The web tightens, Watson. Then Barstow is an instrument, not a hand, Holmes said. He oils locks from habit. His indignation was not forged. Harcourt furnished a lure, but the tail of his note is held by another. Find Pike, and we make our next knot. To the works again. I would see in daylight the mark a left hand leaves upon Roman cement when it snatches at a box whose lid is falling. The return to the fleet works in the andante light of mid-morning found the place stripped of its night terrors and equipped instead with that hard, brisk ugliness of industry at speed. Men shouted among wheelbarrows and stacks of brick. A steam winch chuffed like a fretful dragon. The very clay seemed more truculent by day. Lestrade's authority opened us a path as before, and Barstow, with a face hammered to civility, came to meet us. Holmes cut short his courtesies. "We require Pike," he said. "Gas-fitting division, seconded, rough but able." Barstow's jaw worked. "Pike is at his breakfast. He will digest better after he has spoken to us." A runner fetched the man. He proved to be a burly fellow of 40 or so, with the bowed legs of one long used to narrow ladders and a chest like a barrel. His head, bald at the crown, was fringed by hair so dark it had the sheen of coal. His eyes were a remarkable grey and gave an impression of watchfulness beyond the lazy half-sneer of his mouth. He touched the brim of his cap in the direction of Lestrade and looked at Holmes with the cool insolence of a man who knows his value in a dangerous trade. "You are Pike," Holmes observed. "You handle air as if it were a tame thing." Pike's grin widened by a tooth. "Air's a wicked beast, sir, but I know where to poke it. Who are you for?" "For the dead and for the living who would prefer not to follow him," Holmes replied. "You met Sir Julius Fortescue last night?" "No, sir." "Then you expected to." Pike spread his hands. The left came a shade more readily into view. There was a raw rub across the knuckle as if from a strap. "Mr. Harcourt sent word a gentleman might have questions about valves and such. If he'd come, I should have answered. He didn't come to me." Lestrade stepped in. "Where were you between midnight and 2? "In my bed. Ask my landlady." His voice was thick with contempt at the very theatre of the question. "I'm not a watchman. I'm no mole to scratch in drains after curfew." Holmes's gaze moved without haste over the man's person. The chew-polished belt, the smears at the left thigh where a greasy hose had rested, the small tarry crescent on the waistcoat near the second button, the right boot with clay of our ochre hue at heel and a different, greyer dust along the instep. His eyes drifted from these to the yard itself, where, upon a trestle table, a carpenter's rule, a square, and a sheaf of plans lay under a stone. "Your mixing box for Roman cement?" he asked Barstow mildly. "In the shed," Barstow said, suspicious of everything now. "We keep it dry." We crossed to a low shed whose plank door hung from new hinges. Within stood a stout wooden chest with a slatted lid. About its lips lay a drift of pale powder, so fine that one could write with a breath upon it. Holmes lifted the lid and let it drop of its own weight. The fall was checked at the last instant by a leather strap, so that it met the edge with a tempered touch and left upon the surrounding powder a neat crescent. Holmes's eye took in the curve as a musician hears an interval. He stooped and set his hand upon the rim, then withdrew it, leaving a print of his long, nervous fingers upon the soft surface. He looked up at Pike. "A left hand, snatching at a lid that falls too quickly, makes a shallower crescent," he said, "for the arm checks it with less force from that side. A right hand arrests it more squarely, making the crescent deeper towards the hinge. Your marks, Mr. Pike." Pike wiped his palms upon his breeches with an indifference that, upon another man, would have argued guilt. "Any man that mixes will leave marks." "Quite." Holmes pointed to a faint, separate impression a little apart from the rim, a narrow line that curved with a delicate kink near its end. "And any man that uses a loop of twine to hold a plan case's corner and lets it trail will print that loop if he leans across the box. That kink is of the little shears beloved by clerks. You are not a clerk." Pike snorted. "I can't be both man and boy, sir, nor clerk and foreman." Barstow, eager suddenly to be useful where he might also wound, said, "He's left-handed, Mr. Holmes. Look how he takes his cap." Indeed, Pike's left had moved again before the right. The leather of his left glove was rubbed more thin at the thumb. Lestrade gave a sharp, satisfied little breath. Left-handed, and the crescent we saw in the drift was made by a valve head or a hose coupling. Holmes interposed with the gentlest correction. "This crescent," he touched the powder, "is of a lid. But there is profit in observation, Inspector. Let us not bankrupt ourselves of it. Mr. Pike, you have a tarred cap with a broken brim." Pike's eyes narrowed. "Half the men here have." "Yours was lately cut by a nail," Holmes continued, as if pursuing a thread he could not be prevented from winding. "Your waistcoat bears a tar's crescent, your left knuckle a strap's bite, your boot a dust not of this drift. Where did you last go that had Roman cement finer than Barstow's and clay of a greyer wash?" Pike jerked his chin riverwards. "Under Blackfriars. We set a trial line there for a ventilator day before yesterday. The ventilator's cylinder would carry paint stenciling in grey upon black." "It would?" "And if a man wished to hide such letters from the eyes of boys, he would roll the cylinder fast or wipe the sweat it cast at the key with a rough cloth," Holmes added abstractedly. "There is no shame in honest work, Mr. Pike. There can be great shame in what a man lets his work be used for." Pike's mouth twisted. "If some toff wants to send a message down a hole, that's none of my say. I fix the iron. I don't write the letters." Lestrade moved smartly to the shed's far side. "What's in this locker?" "It's Pike's," Barstow supplied with relish. "We keep them to keep out thieving." The lock yielded to the foreman's key. Within lay a pair of pattens, broad wooden soles with leather straps, spotted with our ochre clay at the edges and dusted with the same fine grey powder upon the top. Beside them slumped a coil of rubberized canvas hose, its surface sticky with a tar-like dressing. Atop these, as incriminating as a pistol, upon a parson's pillow, perched a tarred cap with a brim raggedly broken and fresh scored by a nail. Lestrade uttered an exclamation of triumph. Barstow burst into oaths of mingled vindication and alarm. Pike's face, however, did not blanch. It hardened. "They're mine," he said steadily. "I used the patterns yesterday morn to fetch a tool off the clay. The hose is company property. I hold what I'm told. The cap, yes, that's mine. A nail took it on the bridge. And what then? Do these things pull a gentleman out of his carriage and lay him among rats?" "Not by themselves," Lestrade returned, but his eye had the gleam of a hound that feels the quarry's hair. "But they can carry a hose into a drift and set a cylinder to sweating and leave a man to breathe what kills. You were to meet Sir Julius. He was lured there. You had the means." Holmes raised a quieting hand. He had taken up the patterns and was examining the leather straps. With his nail he teased up a fibre that clung at the stitching, scarlet, fine, and kinked. "Red twine," he remarked, so mildly that no man could have said whether he addressed us or himself. "Caught where a loop was hastily broken, the same burr upon the cut. Curious." Pike watched him without blinking. "Clark's string gets everywhere," he said, echoing Harcourt's bitterness with an odd exactness. "And yet," Holmes murmured, "not everywhere leaves its signature so plainly." He set the patterns back with a care that would have done for a child. "Inspector, you will wish to make your dispositions. You have before you a left-handed foreman whose kit contains the very devices we have traced from key to drift, who was named by the board's young gentleman as the expected counsellor to the dead, and whose habits square with the marks observed. If you bind him, you will be praised for prudence. If you do not, you will be blamed for negligence." Lestrade stiffened a little, scenting the irony, but too occupied with his own steps to challenge it. "Pike," he said sharply, "you will remain within the yard until I release you. Step beyond the gate, and you will be arrested on the instant. Barstow set a man to watch him." Pike swung his gaze to Holmes. "Are you satisfied?" Holmes's face, which to strangers can appear bloodless and impersonal as a mask, softened by some infinitesimal degree. "I am never satisfied until I have found not a man who could have done a thing, but the man who could have done it in the only way it was in fact done," he answered. "For that we require one more sight below. Watson, your steadiness; Lestrade, your lantern." We descended once more to the drift. In daylight, the little world under earth had a melancholy clarity. Holmes went down upon his knees at the threshold as before, but now his attention fixed not upon the obvious depressions of the patterns, but upon two tiny threads caught in the clay just within, one pale, one darker. With the point of his knife he lifted them to his envelope. He held the lantern so that its light raked along the timber upright and the iron gate and picked out, upon the iron's lower bar, the faintest smear, darker than rust, duller than clay, a brush of something waxy that clung in a crescent no wider than a halfpenny. He touched it to his tongue and made a face. "Carnauba and lamp-black," he said, "a polish such as certain gentlemen favour for their boots. Pike's boots are greased with tallow. This is of a man who sits at tables that require shining." His eyes rose to meet mine, and in their depths I glimpsed for an instant a satisfaction he did not otherwise display. "And there is our left-handedness used where a right hand would have served. How inconvenient to be born dexter and to counterfeit a sinistral's reach." "What do you see?" I whispered, unable to help myself. "A thread," he said lightly. "Two, in fact, and a knot. It will take an hour to teach them to speak." He straightened, all ease and languor again, and turned to Lestrade with a little bow of manner that always irritated that worthy. "You have been industrious, Inspector. Pray continue. I shall trouble Mr. Barstow for a table and a quiet office above ground. We must read before we accuse, lest the book we close be the wrong man's life." Barstow's clerk, a sandy young man whose fingers bore the permanent blue of copying ink, surrendered his high desk with a frightened alacrity, and Holmes, having secured a patch of table by the window, set out his little budget of trifles upon the scarred boards as a general might lay down cavalry and guns. He asked for a clean tumbler, a spoonful of water from the pump, a strip of white rag, and the cheap candle that stood already to hand in a brass socket. These, with his lens and the envelopes I had seen him fill, made a singular chemistry. He began with the two minute threads from the drift. Against the white rag and the window's bleached daylight, their characters declared themselves to my practised eye as surely as if they had shouted. One, by a faint lustre and a certain obstinacy of curl, was a silk fibre of fine weave. The other, duller and harsher, was wool, worsted, worn and a trifle dirty. Holmes breathed upon the silk, and it took a memory of the crescent in which it had been lifted. The wool lay mere honest stuff. "Sir Julius wore wool," I said involuntarily, recalling the dead man's sober evening suit. "Just so," Holmes murmured, and slipped the silk aside like a card he would not yet show. He moistened the rag, rubbed a corner of it upon the halfpenny crescent he had raised from the iron gate, and held the cloth near the candle, turning it with a deft hand so that the heat kissed it rather than licked. A faint bloom rose upon it, and the room filled with that clean, faintly exotic scent with which certain valets flatter their masters' boots. Holmes raised the cloth and offered it under my nose without looking at me. "Carnauba," I said. "Canova with lamp black, not bone black," he returned absently. "Our foreman greases, our gentlemen shine." He drew out the flake of grey paint from the key and laid it beside the tiniest shaving he had brought away unnoticed from Pike's locker. Only Holmes could have plucked it from the stenciling on the hose without the owner's knowledge. He wetted and pressed the two. The edges aspired to one another as kin, but the hue of the one was a whisper deeper than the other. Holmes made a soft sound in his throat, neither assent nor denial, only interest. He took next the little dart of railway timetable that I had kept flat in my notebook at his request. Under his lens, the underlined 12.37 showed a slight bite into the paper where the pencil had travelled twice along its course with a steady and educated hand. Holmes compared it for an instant with the entry 12.21 we had seen on the club's book. My memory for the shape of a hand is not his, but I could see when he placed a traced line of the club's figures upon the timetable with that fraudulent transparency in which he occasionally indulged, that the man who made the ledger's neat strokes wrote with a light nib and would underline as he sits, as Harcourt sits, not as the underliner of our scrap. Holmes marked the dart's edge with a minute cross in pencil, then rapped it again. The light shifted upon the desk. Outside, a whistle blew, and the hammer music of the yard returned to its merciless beat. Lestrade's step fretted the threshold. Barstow's voice beat uselessly upon some wall of process within which the yard must move. Holmes remained quite still for a long 15 seconds, his eyes lowered and their fire turned inwards. When he rose, it was with that sudden discharge of force which I have seen in him when the last card is not yet laid, but he has counted the pips upon it. "Barstow," he said, "you will oblige me with the loan of 1 pattern and a strap. No, not Pike's, the set you keep, for common loan. I also require a pound of the Roman cement from your shed, and as clean a board as you possess. Have your man bring them to the drift mouth." Barstow, bewildered but obedient, dispatched a labourer. Holmes turned to Lestrade with a smile so urbane that it would have set an archbishop at ease. "Inspector, you have done excellently. Keep Pike where he is. At present he is safer upon your ground than abroad. Send a constable to Mr. Harcourt with my compliments, to say that I borrow for an hour only the services of the club's head boots. Yes, do not look so black. The club will do more for Mr. Sherlock Holmes than the yard can wring from it in a week." Lestrade's eyebrows shot up. "Boots?" "A gentleman's boots are his diary," Holmes returned. "We sometimes require a leaf." We went below once more. At the threshold, Holmes directed the labourer to spread a thin skin of the pale Roman cement upon the clean board, and lay it upon bricks until it was level with the drift's clay. He had me set the loaned pattern upon this skin and strap it in 2 fashions. First, as a right-handed workman, tightening the buckle with his right and giving the final tug across the instep. Then, as a left-handed man, buckling contrariwise. The impressions when the pattern kissed the tender cement and was lifted differed subtly. Where the strap ended its journey, the leather left a faint nip at the buckle. The direction of the final pull made a bias in the grain. Holmes, crouched, compared these to the spectral depressions at the drift mouth with a rapt attention and the quiet delight of a connoisseur who has found in a canvas, beneath a grime layer, the ghost line of the master's own hand. "Not Pike's," he said at last, very softly, "nor the loaned pair's commoner habit. A man of the right hand wore them and contrived the left man's gait in the clay, but the straps confess him. It is weary work to be ambidexter for an hour." Lestrade, who had followed little of this fine discrimination, seized upon what most flatteringly met his hopes. "Not Pike's," he repeated, already composing righteousness for the report that would absolve his prudence. "Then we are at Mr. Harcourt." "We are at a man who polishes his boots with carnauba and lamp-black to a theatre sheen, and who had cause to wear pattens for an hour, and to bend with his right hand, where a left would have been more convenient," Holmes returned. But his manner, though he spoke the words in Lestrade's hearing, was that of a man communing with his own demonstration. He drew me a pace aside. "There is an inconsistency, Watson, upon which the whole structure turns. You shall forgive me if I carry it for a little. It is like a small egg. If we show it too soon, lesser men will poke at it until there is nothing left to hatch." "I have learnt," I said, "to wait until the chick pecks." He smiled with that sudden boyishness which now and again lifts his lean face into something like beauty. "Good. Now to set a small cock crowing." The head boots from Sir Julius's club arrived with a dignity equal to any peer's. He was a short, grave man with hands like walnut shells and a lapel brush eternally at the ready. He removed his hat to Holmes with a solemnity that would have made a comedy of any less grave exchange. "You sent, sir," he said to Holmes, ignoring the presence of the law with marvellous tact, "for a leaf of a diary." "So I did," Holmes returned, and in 2 sentences conveyed to him what the smear on the iron had told us, and what the precise odour of the polish suggested. The little man's eye grew bright with professional pride, and pained with equal professional offence. "We keep the carnauba," he said, "for the gentlemen that will have a glass in their toes. It is dear, and the application wants a patient hand. We do not waste it upon members that stump. Mr. Fortescue wore a well-kept boot, but had no vanity for glass. Mr. Harcourt's boots are too new to hold a mirror yet. Mr. Mallow's, he shined last night, for Mr. Mallow's extraordinary, he always has. There is a way he sets his foot upon the rail." He broke off, abashed at his fluency. "Mr. Mallow's is of Warriner and Larch," Holmes said, as if in confirmation of a thought already fully formed. "He sat with Mr. Harcourt after Sir Julius left. He has a comma-shaped scar before his ear. He is, besides, of that energetic, thwarting sort that cannot leave even a strap to buckle in a natural fashion, if it may serve him to do otherwise. The head boots, who cared for scars only as they met the line of a collar, bowed. "I know nothing of earmarks, sir." "I know this. Mr. Mallow's valet sent for a pot of the best last evening by the boy at 10 o'clock, saying his master had splashed mud on the steps and could not end the night unshod. I sent it, and I did not get it back." Holmes's nostril betrayed his inward satisfaction by the faintest dilation. "You shall have it again, with thanks and a sovereign to soothe the affront to your art," he said. "Inspector, pray do not blaze. If you rush at Mr. Mallow's, he will recoil into some hole that the board keeps for such creatures. Give me 1 hour. Pike will not fly, Harcourt will not think. Mallow's will try to clean a stain which is in the skin itself." We left the boots like a small moral statue in his borrowed underworld, and once more the air above touched the lungs like a benediction. Holmes walked fast. "Watson," he said, "you will do me a service that wants a brave face and the quiet of your medical manner. You will call at Warriner and Larch in the Strand and ask to see Mr. Mallow's upon a matter of life and health. Say you are concerned for a labourer taken ill from noxious air, and require the precise composition of a dressing their firm applies to hoses. Say that a drop upon the tongue blisters, which it does not, but the name will startle him. Watch his ear, his comma will redden. If he refuses you, observe his boots. Observe whether the toe bears a halfpenny crescent of polish, abraded by an iron bar. Meanwhile, I have other eyes to borrow." "Whose?" I asked, as we took a corner, at speed and a messenger near, ran under our wheels. Those of a boy in a tarred cap who sniffed last night and sniffs today, Holmes answered. When a man puts on a cap that is not his own, he leaves the smell of his own hair in it and carries away the smell of tar. I wish to know who bought cough lozenges at a chemist's within a furlong of Blackfriars between midnight and 1. The city records everything, Watson. We have only to read. I lost no time in obeying Holmes's injunction, for I have learnt that in the interval between his thought and his action, a man may be trampled by events. Warriner and Larch's premises in the Strand presented that prosperous severity which firms display when they would reassure capital. Plate glass, black lettering modestly certain of itself, and a uniformed porter who drew himself up with the quiet appetite of a man accustomed to blocking importunity. My card, however, bore the legend Dr. John H. Watson, and the additional murmur that a labourer lay ill from noxious air opened the doors with Christian alacrity. Presently I was shown into a cool inner room, smelling of wax, oil, and tracing paper, where a gentleman rose from a drafting table and turned to me with a courteous, appraising glance. He was of middle height, compactly built, and carried his head with the forward thrust of a man who meets wind on scaffolds. The scar before his right ear, precisely that comma Holmes had remarked, lent a sardonic twist to a face otherwise frank and energetic. His moustache was close and military. His hands, when he laid down his rule, showed that smooth thickening about the thumb pads peculiar to those who have long handled tools but now direct others to wield them. His boots gleamed. Indeed, they caught the slant light and threw it back with that faint, glassy flash which I had already been schooled to observe. "Mr. Mallows?" I said. He inclined his head. "At your service, Doctor. They tell me you have a man taken with bad air." "I am sorry for it. It is our business to get air right where men are buried alive. How can I serve?" "It may be," I returned, taking the tone of professional candour that has won more confidences than any bravado, "that the composition of a dressing upon your ventilator hoses has produced an irritation. There is a rumour of a tar-like preservative that blisters upon the tongue." He smiled with his eyes rather than his mouth. "Blisters upon the tongue? That would be an odd way to test a hose, Doctor." "You would not advise it?" "I would advise keeping one's tongue for speech," he returned, good-humouredly. "Rubberized canvas is dressed with a little Stockholm tar and a varnish. What your friend Mr. Barstow calls sticky. Our men curse it because it pulls at the hairs like a jealous wife. It would not blister unless warmed and laid long upon a tender skin." The civility of his tone did not disguise the watchfulness in him. His gaze travelled quick and light over my person, rested for a bare instant on the cuff of my coat, on my boots, on the inside of my right hand, as it curved about the brim of my hat, and came back to my face. He was, I saw, a man accustomed to measuring men as well as timbers. "You have heard," I ventured, as if the thought had but then presented itself, "of the sad affair at the Fleet Works this morning?" He gave the decent wince. "Sir Julius, yes, a grievous loss to the public and to the profession. I knew him at a distance. He had the gift of going straight to the weak rib in any arch." "He left his club upon a summons," I said, watching not his eyes now, but the delicate flush that rose along the scar. It answered me like a barometer. "Some speak of a note." "Clubs breed notes," said Mallows almost lightly. "And rumours. If there is any concrete assistance we can provide to the board or the yard, they have only to say it." His boots, as he turned a fraction to indicate a chair, caught again the light. The toe of the right bore, faint but certain, a halfpenny crescent dulled, as if recent polish had been bruised upon a bar, The left had a narrower smear of dullness, no natural pair. There was also, close to the second button of his waistcoat, a mote-like black that could have been nothing or could have been tar. My impulse was to look away, for there is a moment in such observation when the noticed fleck seems indecent, like a man's private stain exposed. "You will send me, then," I concluded, rising as if content, "a note of the constituents of your dressing, with any caution you think fit. My man, if I can still call him so, lies at the Charity in Shooter's Alley." He bowed. "You shall have it within the hour." The politeness extended to the door, where he worked the handle with his right hand and stood aside for me to pass. His grip was firm, the sinews of the wrist showing cleanly beneath the cuff. No man ever wore his handedness so openly, and yet, I thought, so carefully. In the street I found an urchin with a newsbill bawling of engineer dead in tunnel, and brought him into silence with a penny. Then I took a cab to the appointed corner, for Holmes had named the chemists with the threadbare certainty of a man who has already tried the handle and found the latch give. He was waiting for me at the door of a tiny shop, whose globes were so neglected that the blue and red were, each of them, a respectable London brown. He held in his gloved hand a little packet, and in his eye that suppressed gaiety with which he receives an ally's confirmation. "Your man shows polish upon iron?" he asked, before I spoke. "A crescent dulling on the right. Toe, a sister, smear upon the left," I answered. "He denied nothing because we charged him with nothing. He will send me within the hour the composition of the dressing we do not require." "Excellent. Meanwhile," Holmes said, tapping the packet, "a gentleman with engineer's hands, ink and oil both, clean at the nails but dark at the webs, bought throat pastilles here at 20 minutes past 12. He smelt faintly of Stockholm tar, and more strongly of the clean high note you smelt in the drift, a carnauba much considered by conscientious boots." The chemist remembers his comma scar, though he called it a little twist by the ear. He remembers also that the gentleman asked the way to the Blackfriars office, and that he coughed with the impatience of one who resents any human frailty that delays him. Our messenger boy's sniff has found its man a guardian. I think Mr. Mallow sat up late last night with the worst of intentions and a tender throat. "And the boy?" I asked. "Bought nothing," Holmes returned. "He was a boy, a true one. He carried a note to the club and was given a sixpence and a lie. He is at present eating pie on my account 2 doors down, and will remember the faces of men to the day of judgment if I ask him to. We must not spend him until the performance requires a curtain call." We walked a little in silence, the Strand's traffic flowing round us with that inexorable noise which is the city's breathing. Holmes's profile, under the brim pulled low against the watery light, wore its most ascetic aspect. "You have him, then?" I said. "I have a hand that counterfeits another," he answered. "I have a polish that could not have been in Pike's locker, and a varnish that was. I have a cylinder whose letters wished not to be read, and a plan twine whose kink matches that upon a patterned strap. I have the tide, the hour, the cough, and the boy. What I do not yet have is why a clever man killed Sir Julius in a particular way, and not in any one of a dozen easier fashions. Men choose their tools for the sake of their ends, or for the sake of their vanities, Watson. I must learn which vice I am dealing with." A constable, out of breath, intercepted us with a salute and a scrawl. "From Inspector Lestrade, sir. Urgent." Holmes tore the note with his nail and read. "Ah," he said, his voice like a string plucked. "Our cock has crowed." "What is it?" "Pike," he replied, curtly. "Someone has tried to fetch him." He quickened his step, and I kept pace. A fellow came to the yard with a message that Mr. Barstow required Pike at once at the Fleet mouth for an inspection. Barstow had sent no such order. Lestrade's man set to watch, smelt the trick and took the name Harcourt. Clever of Mallows to spend another man's coin twice. The caller left by the river. The head count of cylinders in Barstow's shed shows one gone. Then he means to reproduce his first success and fasten it upon his second, Holmes said. And for the first time that day, I heard anger under the ice of his tone. Come, Watson, we must choose where to be when the hose couples to the iron and the letters on the black roll beneath the arch. If Pike be fool enough to answer any call from below, he will die as prettily as Fortescue, and our man will weep crocodile tears upon his grave and polish his boots to meet the widow. The cab we hailed bounded like a live thing under Holmes's urgings. As we swung towards the river, the air took on that gritty bite of noon coal, and I confess my fingers were not steady upon my stick. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes fixed upon some projection of the ground ahead, invisible to any but himself. "Do you think he suspects you?" I asked. "He suspects no one," Holmes returned. "He believes in his own intelligence as some men believe in Providence. He will come because he cannot imagine a world in which he is anticipated. That," he added, with a ghost of a smile, "is a very pleasant world. In the mind." The cab set us down before the palisade with such abruptness that the horse shied. Holmes was through the gate before the echo of the wheel had died. Lestrade met us at a run, breath pluming in the cold. "You had my note," he panted. "Pike is inside the office under guard. The caller left by the river. My man lost him at the Arches. The mud there shows a barrow's run since noon that was not there at 9. Barstow counts one ventilator cylinder gone. The watch say there's a boy—" "Who will not be used twice," Holmes cut him short. "Good. Keep Pike where he is. If he stir, clap irons on him for his own salvation. Peek at the gate. No one below, on your oath. You and I, Inspector, take the river. Watson, at my elbow. We will stand where a hose must kiss iron." We took the narrow alley that led beneath the bridge to the outfall. The fleet's mouth breathed its sour cool upon us. The stone steps were a greasy ladder, the arch a black mouth with a faint whispering beyond, like a sleeper's dream. Holmes glanced once at the coping he had studied that morning. His hand darted to the iron ring that served for mooring, and rubbed it with the edge of his sleeve, until the bar shone. The right-hand bar of the little outer gate he wiped likewise, leaving the surface clean as a boot heel before the brush. From his pocket he drew the poor white rag he had used in Barstow's office, and smeared upon its corner the polish he had raised from the drift's bar. With 2 brisk passes he left upon the ring, and the bar a skin so thin no eye but his would have guessed at it. "When he couples," he said softly, "he will lay his toe here and his hand here. The iron will take a second layer from the first hand. The toe will bruise the glass. If I err, we lose nothing. If I do not, we take his signature while he writes his name." We melted back into the shadow where the bridges peer through a deeper night. The river talked to itself in little gurgles. A barge farther out thumped like a sleepy heart. Somewhere a bell tolled a quarter. Presently there came from the strand a faint, growing rub of wood on stone, and the hesitant squeak of a wheel that resented its task. A porter's truck nosed into the gloom. Behind it trudged 2 figures. The first wore a cap whose tarred brim I could have sworn to in a court. The second, taller and better set, had his collar up and his chin sunk. The truck carried a black cylinder secured with twine at the ends. The letters upon it had been smeared with a handful of mud, but the grey ghost of their shapes peered through where the smearing was careless. "Mind the letters," the leading man muttered, and my heart gave a leap, for I had heard that common phrase once already in the day, and Holmes's chin, in the half-light, made the least satisfied motion. "They'll take no harm," returned the taller man, with that pleasant dryness I had heard in Warrener and Larch's office. "Set the nose to the iron. Quick now, we have 10 minutes. Holmes's hand touched my sleeve, as one steadies a horse. "Not yet," came his breath. Lestrade's silhouette, lean and rigid, was a pace beyond. I felt, rather than saw, the set of his jaw. The men lifted the cylinder from the barrow with practised economy, laid it against the iron ring, and unlooped the hose. The taller man took the coupling in his right hand, set his right toe upon the bar, as a man does when he desires 1 inch more of reach, and bore his weight. I heard, the next instant, Holmes's little sigh of content. The leading man stepped back to hold the barrow from running. He sniffed once, a poor, human sniff, and rubbed his hand across his mouth. "Pike!" called the taller man, in a voice that would have passed for any foreman's. "Pike!" The arch threw the name back at him with a dull mockery. No answer came save the river's whisper. "Where's the rat?" the assistant grumbled. "Below," the other returned shortly. "Turn the wheel." The assistant bent. The coupling snicked. Holmes moved. He did not spring. He stepped out as a gentleman enters a room at the moment he is expected, and his voice, when it came, had the cool, courteous ring of a summons in a drawing-room. "Mr. Mallows, pray do not turn that wheel. We should be obliged to you if you would first examine the state of your boots." The taller man's head jerked round with the jerk of a struck hawk. For a fraction he hesitated, then his hand dropped, and his face, in the washed half-light under the arch, composed itself admirably. "You speak to me?" he said. "To you," Holmes returned, and a dark figure was suddenly at Mallows's shoulder, Lestrade, while another constable's bulk filled the way back. "You will oblige me by keeping your right foot where it lies. Inspector, let him not stir the toe. Now, Mr.
Mallows, see the iron ring beneath your boot. If you lift away, we shall find upon that smooth bar a halfpenny crescent dulled, where your polish has kissed it twice in a day, once below ground and once by the river. And here he touched the coupling, where Mallows's right hand had rested a moment. The carnauba you favour lies atop the trace I laid, as one gentleman writes over another's thin card at a club. You will spoil the handwriting if you move. Mallows's eyes went to the iron, then back to Holmes. He laughed, not grossly, but with an admiration I confess I half shared. "By heaven," he said, "you are an artist. May I at least know my audience?" "You may assume the yard," Lestrade said grimly, "and Mr. Sherlock Holmes." "Ah!" He bowed to Holmes with a flicker of that good-humoured respect he had shown me in the Strand. "Then I am fortunate. I had not hoped for a jury of taste. Shall I tell you now how this was all a misunderstanding, or have you words prepared for my mouth?" "Keep your wit," Holmes said dryly. "You will need it. This is no misunderstanding. You lured Sir Julius from his club at 12:25 by a note you caused Mr. Harcourt to write. You met him not at the office but here, where your porter's truck had already brought down a ventilator cylinder dressed to look like any other. You ran a hose under the gate and through the drift, and with the air you promised you delivered what passes for it, the breath of a gas house, while your man above kept the lock and key comfortable in a watchman's ignorance. You chose slack-tide to rob the fleet of its worst reek and spare your own throat. You wore patterns to cheat the clay and tried the left-handed pull upon the straps, but you are too roundly right for such a masquerade, and your boots confessed you upon iron. You wiped the letters and told your fool to mind them. You sat afterwards with Harcourt to hold him steady and sent for polish to sweeten your conscience. Mallows heard him out, as a man hears a good case for the other side of a cause in which he is already engaged. "And the why, Mr. Holmes?" he said pleasantly. "A motive, if you please. I killed no one." Holmes's gaze sharpened to a needle. Sir Julius meant to halt work for a fortnight. Warriner and Larch stood to bleed. You have fought your way upward by making difficulties look like plays of the wrist. You do not endure men who halt your wrist. He had found the weak rib in an arch of yours. You could not afford his public caution.
Plausible, Mallows admitted. It does you credit to err so gracefully. Alas, Sir Julius was a patron of ours. He liked what we made. He would have mended my ribs. Try again. Holmes's tone did not harden. It cooled. You are a man who will not, even now, give me the satisfaction of watching you lie badly. Very well, the why stands upon 2 feet, rage and convenience. Rage because Sir Julius laughed at dinner when he read the figures you and your friends had contrived and underlined the hour at which your slack arithmetic was most bare. 12:37. Convenience because the same hour served your wind. Mallows's eyes flickered. You make a brave goose of a gander. But where is your proof that I brought poison? Air, Mr. Holmes, I bring air. The river, Holmes returned. Will discuss with us at our leisure what your cylinder carries. You will forgive me if I do not take a lungful to determine it. Meanwhile, there is the thread of silk I lifted from within the drift, caught where a gentleman's cuff brushed the timber as he leaned to set a valve head, a silk of a weave your shirt-maker favours, Mr. Mallows, and such as no foreman owns. There is the twine from the plan case kinked by your office shears and caught in Pike's borrowed patterns. There is the polish upon the iron. There is the chemist who will tell you whether your throat pastilles have soothed a conscience as well as a cough. There is the boy who saw you say your little phrase. There is the head boots who will testify as to whose mirror shine we smell in the clay. Above all, there is your second act, with Pike for victim, which, had we been 5 minutes slower, would have made you the yard's useful witness, and not its quarry. I see, Mallows said softly. You have a net. You will draw it. Permit me a question in return. If I take my foot from this ring, will your inspector leap as a terrier leaps a rat? I shall, said Lestrade with feeling. Then allow me the luxury of stillness, Mallows answered, and his poise, I own, had a touch of the gallant. It seems it is my turn to be instructed in art. Holmes's head inclined by a shade. Your assistant is less still, he remarked, and in the same instant the man with the tarred cap, who had glanced once too often towards the open way, bolted for the steps. He managed 3 before Lestrade's constable took him by the collar and brought him down like a sack, the cap flying. The head beneath was that of a pale, slack-mouthed clerk, not Pike's at all. His hair, when the cap, wrenched free, carried a black, tarry line across the parting, like a poor man's tonsure. "E.H.," Holmes observed, with that dispassion that stings more than anger. "Edwin Harcourt, I thought you would arrive upon your own lie at last. Mr. Mallows borrowed your pen. Now he borrows your courage." Harcourt struggled, then sagged as if a string had been cut. "I didn't know," he gasped. "I sent the note. He said it was policy. I never touched the—" "You touched twine and a shears," Holmes said. "You touched a boy with 6pence and a path. Mr. Mallows touched the wheel." For the first time, Mallows's composure slipped by a hair's breadth. "Let the clerk go," he said sharply. "Presently," Holmes returned. "Inspector, remove the coupling. Do not stir the toe. We will secure the cylinder and label it with its maker's name, which the mud had almost spared us. Mr. Mallows, you will accompany us to the yard. If you desire to continue to breathe air that is not of your own bottling, you will walk between myself and Dr. Watson. I warn you that if you attempt the river, it will not be to your taste." Mallows looked past us into the dark. His jaw set. Then he shrugged with a half-smile which, in another theatre, would have won applause. "I confess," he said, "I was curious to know whether a man could make London's own breath kill for him without the city's knowing it. You have answered me you can, not quite. My compliments, gentlemen." He lifted his foot with deliberation. Lestrade's hand was there before. The soul had wholly left the iron. He bent, eyes gleaming, to peer at the faint, bruised crescent standing out upon the bright metal like a watermark at last shown light. He gave Ione a little crow. Holmes's mouth curved by a hair. "There are signatures," he said, "which no solicitor can erase." We went up from the arch with our prisoner between us, the cylinder following upon the porter's truck, like a black dog that had bitten once and might bite again, if not watched. Lestrade detailed 2 men to walk with it nose to wind and to halt at the yard for the police surgeon. Mallows gave one brief, contemptuous glance at their caution and thereafter held his peace. Harcourt stumbled once on the cobble and would have fallen had not the constable's grip upon his collar taken the weight as a hook takes a fish. At the yard a small room was cleared, the windows flung open, and the cylinder stood upon trestles beneath Lestrade's eye like a dangerous patient. When the valve was eased by the surgeon's careful hand and the hiss came with that angry whisper I had already heard below, a candle held a foot away guttered and died. The surgeon drew in his lips and stared at the grey plume that spilled upon the light like a snake's breath. He did not put his nose near it. "Coal gas and worse," he said. "Choke damp enough to fell an ox." "It felled a gentleman," Holmes returned. "Seal it again. Inspector, you have here a contrivance by which a murderer conveyed into a confined place air that did not deserve the name. You shall have your chemist for proportions, but your juryman will understand a candle." Lestrade nodded grimly, and, with the relish of a man who feels his case take on weight, sent for a photographer to commit the position of the dials and the coupling to the permanence of glass. Mallows watched all this with that detached attention which only left his face when his gaze slid, unbidden and displeased with itself, for sliding, to Harcourt. The young man sat upon a chair as if it were the end of a plank over water, his fingers worrying themselves raw. Holmes bent to him and spoke in a tone so mild that a guilty child might have thrown himself upon it. "Mr. Harcourt, you have walked behind a man into whose shadow you do not belong. You wrote a note and sent a boy to the door of a club. You held a truck's nose for a minute. You asked a chemist a direction. You did not kill Sir Julius. The law will not hang you for being weak." Harcourt raised distraught eyes. He said, Sir Julius would do for us all if he stopped the fleet. He said we must show him the air went true. He took the cylinder from the shed and told me to mind my tongue and my twine. I swear to you I thought—" He stopped, catching at the rag of pride a clerk wraps himself in. "I thought he meant to frighten him." Mallows's lip moved. Holmes only laid his forefinger lightly on the young man's sleeve. "You have told me what I already knew, with one omission. Who counsels Mr. Mallows? You are not the mind, you are the hand that sharpens pens. Whose pen did you sharpen?" Harcourt shook his head in a motion of despair rather than denial. "He is the firm," he whispered. "He is Warriner and Larch as much as our sign is. Who would stand against him?" Holmes turned, not to Mallows, but to Lestrade. "Hold him," he said, meaning the young man. "Where his fear cannot hear its own echo, put him in the watch-room, not the cell, and give him tea, not solitude. He will tell truth after heat has left him. Mallows smiled with one side of his mouth. You think to split us, Mr. Holmes? I think, Holmes answered, to bring to the surface the mind that found in London's own breath a weapon. His eyes shifted back to Harcourt. Did Sir Julius suspect? He laughed, the clerk blurted. He laughed at the figures in the Strand, and he drew a line under the hour, 12:30 to 1, when the fleet runs easiest. He said, any fool could contrive an illusion then. The words came out in a shudder. Mallows said he would never laugh again. Holmes's face did not change. I shall step out for an hour, he said to Lestrade. Do not let Mr. Mallows sign so much as his own name until I am back. When you are asked where Mr. Harcourt is kept, insist you cannot say. Then, since it is hopeless to keep any secret in London, let it slip that he is not in a cell but in Peake's watch-room at the Fleet Works, with a constable at the door, and that he will make a statement at 7 o'clock tonight. Lestrade gave him a sharp look that held both comprehension and the jealousy of a craftsman who sees another lay out his bench. I am to bait a hook. You are to bait two, Holmes returned. One for the man who cannot bear to leave a witness breathing, one for the man who cannot bear to be thought a subordinate. He glanced then at Mallows. You will desire to send word to someone you trust, he added conversationally. You shall not. The yard is inhospitable to messages from men who love air in bottles. Mallows's eyes were amused again. If I have a master, Mr. Holmes, you will be a greater statesman than I if you can make me name him. I do not require your tongue for that, Holmes said, and his glance slid for one instant to the faint, dull crescent that still marked the toe of the man's boot. Watson, with me. In the cab he sat forward as he had done before, but there was no heat in his voice now, only that alert stillness that in him presaged swift movement. Sir Julius's house, he said. We must ask his papers what his mouth no longer can. The answer to the why is not vanity alone. There is a shape behind it. The Fortescue house in Leinster Gardens received us with that quiet which follows a blow. A maid wept in corners. A butler moved as if every step must be rehearsed before it could be taken. Lady Fortescue, a small, resolute woman whose grief had already clothed itself in action, received us in a morning-room whose tables were piled with letters and notes. Mr. Holmes, she said, my husband read your monograph on coal-tar derivatives and had a high opinion of your mind. I am told this was not an accident. It was not, madam, Holmes returned simply. I require your permission to examine Sir Julius's study. She led the way herself, and we entered a room that bore, in its ordered confusion, the impress of the man, a shelf of tide tables, a wall where maps of the city's entrails were pinned and repinned till the paper wore through at the pinholes, a long table where drafts, annotated in a clean, decisive hand, lay in columns under paperweights. Holmes went to these as a bee goes to its flower. He stood a long minute before a particular sheet, and then made a small, satisfied sound. There, he said. It was a schedule of ventilation capacities and gas yields. At the margin, Sir Julius had written, in his neat, small hand, a note. W&L's figures overstate by 1/3 at Slackwater, C 1237. Danger to lungs masked. Hold works till recalculated. Beneath it, later in the same hand, a second note. M to meet tonight for correction. H to send message. There was also a small square of silk pinned beside the sheet, a scrap such as a shirtmaker would send to show a weave. Beneath the pin Sir Julius had jotted, "Meksh cuff, silk, tell him to leave vanity at home." Holmes's mouth twitched. He meant to chide him, not denounce him, he murmured. He thought Mallows salvageable, a mind he could keep for the public. He asked Harcourt to carry a summons for good. Our Mr. Mallows brought his own summons for evil. Lady Fortescue had come to his shoulder and read with that courage some women possess in extremity. She closed her eyes a moment, then opened them clear. "You will see justice done," she said. It was not a question. "I will see the truth told," Holmes answered. "It is often the best part of justice." He took from the tide table a little folded paper, so creased that I recognized the twin of the fragment we had lifted from the dead man's hand. At the hour 12:37, a pencil line stood, underlined twice. Holmes slipped it into his pocket. "Your husband's laugh at dinner did him honor," he said. It was not scorn, it was the relief of a man who sees a mistake and can mend it. There are men who do not distinguish between correction and contempt. When we were once more in the street, he said, "The egg has cracked, Watson. You spoke of an inconsistency." "Two married," he replied. "Why wear patterns and counterfeit the left hand if you are to kill with a gas no clay foot betrays? Because Mallows planned two ways, one that threw guilt upon a foreman and one that left him a spectator. He brought the hose below and the cylinder above. He was interrupted above by nothing but his own conscience, which is to say not at all. Below he left the small signatures no craftsman can help leaving. The silk I found in the drift could only be his cuff, for Sir Julius wore wool. The polish upon the iron could not be Pike's. The strap bias was right-handed in a left man's track. It is the untidiness of a tidy mind in a hurry." "And the mind behind him?" I asked. "Warriner and Larch," he said, "or a board man fat upon contracts, a mind that prefers not to touch mud. Men like that use two instruments, an ambition and a coward. Mallows is the one, Harcourt the other. We must learn which gentleman has a habit of gloves cut with a notch for a ring finger, the sort that polishes with carnauba because he cannot endure a dull reflection when he raises a glass to his mouth." I stared. "How?" "Because the smear on the drift's iron bore, amid its black, a freckle of gold dust," he returned. I tasted it. There is only one vanity in London that leaves gold upon boots, the habit of testing one's signet with a touch against the glass at the club after the seal is set, lest the impression smear. The particles lodge in the polish and pass to the places where a man steadies himself without thinking. He gave a brief, humourless smile. "We will see whose ring glitters at 7. We reached the yard at 6 and found Lestrade very straight, very official, and very ready. Word had indeed leaked, as Holmes had foretold, that Harcourt was to make a statement at the Fleet Works watch-room at 7 precisely. Peake sat there now with a constable, the door open to the yard for air, and the lamps just taking. The twilight over the river had that sulphurous bruise which is London's evening. Holmes took me apart. "Our friend will not come in a carriage," he said. "He will come afoot, with his collar up and his conscience down, to lay 2 fingers upon a clerk's windpipe and call it Providence. I desire to see whether he looks behind him once." At 5 minutes to the hour, a figure passed the outer gate with that quiet assurance which authority wears when it would not be noticed. He paused only to pull on a pair of gloves. The right hand lingered a fraction over the ring finger as it found its place. The lamps took him in their circle as he approached the watch-room. Lestrade, who had the patience of a cat that evening, waited. I saw as the man stepped into the yellow square of light and raised his head, the gilt gleam at his hand. I had seen that long, bony face upon the board dais when the papers illustrated it, a grave, benevolent mask that could look a city into debt without a blush. "Chairman," Holmes breathed, not above a whisper, "you do not look behind." He came on without a turn of the head, his tall hat drawn low, and his overcoat buttoned to the throat. The constable at the watchroom door rose, saluted the authority implicit in his bearing, and stepped aside. Within, Harcourt sat with his hands about a mug, Peake opposite him, as solemn as a churchwarden. The chairman paused on the threshold as if to collect a suitable gravity for the occasion, then inclined his head to the constable with that restrained benevolence which photographs never fail to catch. "You may leave us," he said. His voice was the very instrument for a subscription dinner. "Mr. Harcourt has been overwrought. I will take his statement for the board." Holmes's hand, light as a moth, pressed my sleeve. "One more pace," he breathed. Lestrade's fingers flexed. The constable hesitated. Peake looked to the yard man, who, true to his brief, replied stolidly, "Orders are that the gentleman is not left." Orders? The chairman turned the full weight of his regard upon the fellow, and allowed dignity to meditate upon remonstrance. Then, mastering annoyance with statesmanlike ease, he stepped into the room regardless, and set his hat upon the table, where it came to rest within an inch of Harcourt's trembling hands. I saw, as he stripped off his gloves, the notch cut fine and old in the right one to spare a signet. The ring itself glimmered as his fingers found their place. He drew the chair close, too close, with the practised intimacy of a man who means to occupy another's breath. "My dear Harcourt," he murmured, "this has been most unfortunate. We must guard the reputation of the board and the works alike. Compose yourself and let us set down exactly what you told me in confidence." His left hand slipped to the door and eased it with the softness of a cat's paw against the jamb. The right, with its heavy ring, rose as if to pat the clerk's shoulder. It hovered there an instant, and in that fraction I saw the heel of the right boot travel imperceptibly to brace against the table's bar, the same unconscious reach that had dulled a toe upon iron. Holmes was in the doorway between one breath and the next, and the tone with which he spoke had in it neither heat nor triumph, only an arctic civility. "Sir Godfrey Pym, I think. Pray keep your seat. Inspector, the chairman has come to take down a confession." Sir Godfrey's hand froze in air, then fell, palm open, upon the table. He half-turned, showing us that dignified, bony profile the illustrated weeklies had taught London to trust. If there was surprise, it did not disorder him. "Mr. Holmes," he said, as if acknowledging an introduction to an equal across a carpet, "you are abroad late. I am here to prevent a young man from doing your work irreparable harm." "Your concern for the law is admirable," Holmes returned. "Unhappily, your boots have laboured against it all the afternoon." Lestrade came past me with that quiet suddenness which is his nearest approach to stealth. "Sir Godfrey Pym," he said, as if tasting the title for the charge, "you will remain where you are." Pym's eyes moved to Lestrade and back again, and his lips performed an act of disdain so slight that it might have been a mere adjustment for breath. "Do not be absurd, Inspector. I have sent word to your superiors. They will be here in 10 minutes. He tapped the mug with a finger whose signet caught the light. "Harcourt is under the board's protection." Holmes took a step into the room and shut the door behind him, not to exclude assistance, but to contain dignity. "Harcourt," he said without looking at the boy, "you will not speak. You will not rise." Sir Godfrey, a man who cannot bring himself to look behind him at a door, will sometimes lay a hand upon a throat before he has composed his face to benevolence. You have chosen your distance badly. Also, your glove betrays you. The notch for the ring is old. The polish on the right toe of your boot is newly bruised and carries with it a dust of gold, such as one acquires when one is in the habit, after sealing, of proving the impression upon glass. Pym's gaze drifted to his glove as if to humour a foolishness. "You are as fanciful in person as in print?" "Fanciful?" Holmes's brows rose a trifle. "You selected Mr. Mallows to run your errands because he has an engineer's hand and an appetite for risk. You underwrote figures you knew to be varnished. Sir Julius meant to strip that varnish at noon, and you underlined the hour as carefully as any culprit, on his very timetable, if you please, which he retained to mark your false peace. You sent Harcourt, your timid vanity, to carry an honest summons, and later to bring patterns and twine to a cylinder whose letters you took great pains not to have read. You, Sir Godfrey, are a man who polishes symbols and men alike. You do not foul your own hands with tar when another's will serve, but you could not forbear the seal of your own presence. It lay upon the iron in Carn Auber, and lamp-black this morning, and upon the mooring ring just now when you paused by the river to justify yourself to yourself in the darkness." A faint pulse ticked at Pym's temple, otherwise he appeared as indifferent as a statue whose likeness is being taken. "You pile conjecture tiptoe and call it a ladder." "I call it a staircase," Holmes returned gently, "with each step numbered. Step 1, Sir Julius's note in his own hand. W&L's figures overstate by 1/3 at slack water, 1237, hold works. Step 2, Harcourt's duplicate message book, no underline, a clerk's hand that does not mimic a gentleman's emphasis. Step 3, the silk thread from the drift, your favourite weave, sent to Sir Julius, pinned to his schedule for your correction. He meant to chide you for it. Step 4, the Polish signature upon the drift's iron and upon the river's ring, Pike's boots, no tallow only. Step 5, the notch in your glove, which leaves the ring bare to leave gold dust in the polish where you thought only to shine. Step 6, your presence now, at an hour you yourself underlined earlier in the day as a time for easy things, only tonight you intended something easier than figures. Do you see, Sir Godfrey? I descend as readily as I climb. It is a curious thing how truth alters air. The little room, with its deal table and smoky lamp, had been the scene of a small, shabby drama. Under Holmes's quiet recitation, it took on the dignity of a court. Pym understood it. He moved his hand from the table, not in impatience, but as a prelude to a speech. In that motion, the signet flashed once more. "Let us suppose," he said, and the orator stirred in him, "that I did urge speed where there was timidity and breadth where there was parsimony. London is a hungry giant. You, Mr. Holmes, and you, Inspector, feed upon sensational scraps. The city feeds upon air and water and stone. Men die in such works. I do not deny a death is lamentable, but to erect upon the accidental pallor of a man found in clay a treason against the city—" "Accidental pallor," Holmes repeated with a faint wonder. "It is a nurse's phrase. Peek, close the window." When the casement had thudded, Holmes leaned and took up the mug from before Harcourt, smelt it, and set it down again untouched. "No, you were not so clumsy, but you did intend stillness. Inspector, if you had not stayed your man, Sir Godfrey would have had 5 minutes' privacy with a frightened clerk, whose breath would have slowed of its own accord at the sound of that voice. I do not think the hand would have been necessary." Harcourt made a small, lost sound in his throat. Pym's lip curled. At last the mask moved. "You think me a mesmerist now?" he said. "I think you a statesman who has learned to speak to the part of men that longs to be told there will be no pain," Holmes answered. "You told Mallows there would be no scandal. You told yourself London would breathe more freely if a troublesome nature left her lungs. You came to tell Harcourt there would be no blame. It is a consistent philosophy. It will not survive cross-examination." Lestrade, who is often slow to enjoy Holmes's finer play but never slow to strike when the moment comes, produced his warrant with a crisp authority that neutralizes many a gentleman's grace. "Sir Godfrey Pym, you are arrested on suspicion of counselling and procuring the murder of Sir Julius Fortescue, and of conspiring with Edwin Harcourt and one Mallows of Warriner and Larch to pervert the course of justice. You will come with me." Pym rose. He drew on his glove with exactness, pausing, as habit demanded, at the notch. "I shall go," he said, and the tone was that of a man who concedes a point to save the game. "You will find my friends numerous. See that you do not make London ridiculous." "London has been in worse hands," Holmes observed. "Peake, my good fellow, you have done your city a service by sitting still as a stone, Mr. Harcourt." He turned his head, and there was neither pity nor disdain in his voice, only an impersonal clemency. "You will be required again. Do not mistake the coming hours for the end of your life. They are the beginning of whether you will have a decent one." We took them out as we had brought Mallows, between the ordinaries of London's pavements and the indifferent drizzle that had begun. There is a particular murmur the street sets up when it sees a carriage door close upon a great name going where great names are unused to go. I confess it stirred me. Holmes, who listens to such things without pleasure, stood bareheaded a moment under the mean lamps, letting the rain cool him as if he had come up once more from a foul depth. "Your egg," I said softly. "It has hatched," he returned. "Do you mark, Watson, that Pym defended only speed and necessity, not figures? He will not contest what he knows can be proved, only the thing that turns proof into guilt. And will the proof run to the knot? It will," he said. "We have the cylinder's breath, we have the polish and the silk, we have the boy and the boots, we have Mallows's attempt upon Pike and Pym's upon Harcourt. Above all, we have Sir Julius's own hand pointing to the hour and naming the fraud. A jury will do the rest. But before we let the city devour its scandal, I will make the sequence plain. I prefer the truth to be drunk neat." He looked back at the low room where Peake had resumed his stool, and the mug steamed quietly upon the table. "Tomorrow," he added, more to himself than to me, "we will lay the stair from first tread to last, and show them how a man may take London's shadow for a tool and be cut by it." "And tonight?" I asked. "Tonight," he said, with that serenity I have seen in him after the chase, "we will send Lady Fortescue a message that calls for neither hope nor despair, but for sleep. It is the only generous air we can bring into that house." Morning brought that washed light which London wears after a night of steady rain, a light that seems to expose the grain of brick and the very temper of stone. I found Holmes at the breakfast table with the remains of a kipper untouched, and the Times folded into a narrow lance, for he had speared out, with that fastidiousness of his, the two columns that mattered and discarded the rest, as men discard rind. He motioned me to the coffee, and when Mrs. Hudson had withdrawn, set his thin forefinger upon the paper. "They have it badly," he observed. "Warriner disclaims, Larch retires to the country, the board is a chorus of injured rectitude. Lestrade requests in the public interest that speculations cease, so we shall indulge it in private and then make an end." There was in his eye that cool brightness which tells me his labour is done, and his mind has returned to its native climate, rarefied, clear, a trifle cruel. Before I could reply, Lestrade himself was shown up, pallid with the vigils of his office, and bristling with the bristles of one who has encountered more gentlemen in a night than his digestion was built to endure. "You will be gratified," he began without preface, "to learn that Mr. Mallows slept indifferently and then asked for pen and paper to set down his share. He admits to bringing the cylinder and coupling the hose, and says Sir Godfrey spoke for London and would answer for the rest. Harcourt has wept himself dry, and names the chairman as the mind that checked the caution at every turn. The chemist has found in the cylinder a mix that would make a church collapse, coal gas, rich, and a portion of something out of a retort house that strips the lungs. The coroner will have a comfortable time. Comfort, Holmes observed, is not the word I would place at the coroner's elbow, but we will lend him what we can. Sit, Inspector, and we shall walk you from the first pebble that rolled to the avalanche that frightened the city. He drew the poker along the hearthrug as if plotting a trench, and with that humility to method which in him was a kind of pride, he laid the affair out in 9 movements. First, he said, Sir Julius, who was not the sort of honest man that sleeps upon a doubt, noted a misstatement in Warriner and Larch's ventilating figures, a 1/3 flourish exactly at the hour when the fleet, being momentarily sweet, would hide it. He underlined the hour upon his timetable and wrote, for his own memory, that the works must halt until recalculation. He intended no scandal. He meant to take Mr. Mallows's cleverness and turn it into service. He sent word by Harcourt to meet at Blackfriars after dinner. Second, Sir Godfrey, who had urged the very flourish Sir Julius laughed at, saw in that laugh not correction, but exposure. He could not abide halt. He loved speed the way some men love applause, because it produces the same noise. He could not descend himself into clay. He had a mind to be obeyed, and hands that smelled of polish. He chose Mallows, a creature of skill and vanity, to make an example that would look like misadventure. Lestrade grunted. He will deny design. He will call it necessity, which is design that has had its hair combed, Holmes returned. Third, Mallows arranged the mechanism. He borrowed a cylinder from the shed, smeared the stamp, fetched hose and pattens, sent for polish, to put his conscience in the mirror, and bought lozenges because his throat, like his heart, disliked foulness. He sent Harcourt's boy with the note, and he came to the river at the underlined hour when the fleet's stink would not betray him to his own stomach. Fourth, Sir Julius, who could laugh at numbers and still keep his appointment, came. Whether Mallows intercepted him upon the quay or in the office matters little. The hose carried up to the drift what the cylinder knew, and the drift returned a man whose face had a pallor we were expected to call earth's work. He was laid where a watchman would find him, and a foreman might be blamed. Fifth, to frame Pike the better, Mallows made a little theatre of left-handedness. He strapped the patterns against the grain, touched where a left would have touched, and left, in doing so, the marks no actor escapes, the bias of a right man's strap, the silk of a gentleman's cuff, the polish of an office boot upon iron that knows only tallow. Sixth, Sir Godfrey could not keep from the scene entirely. He breathed, as great men will, upon his own contrivance. The Carnauba made a thin ghost of him upon the drift's bar, and a second at the mooring ring when he came later to assure himself that London owed him gratitude for not being delayed. He could not resist either, returning for the endgame to hush Harcourt, lest a frightened clerk babble. He came because he is the sort of man who finishes a gesture. Lestrade's eyes flicked in acknowledgment of the picture of Pym at the watchroom door. Holmes went on. Seventh, the attempt to repeat the success upon Pike was provoked by your prudence. You kept the foreman. Mallows meant to make him the chorus to the first act. Our boy and our chemist supplied the accompaniment. We were in time. Eighth, the board's edifice collapsed, as all edifices built upon one man's will do, when we removed the keystone and found it embossed with a signet. Mallows's confession is mortar enough. Harcourt's is the water. But better than both is Sir Julius's own small notes, where he did a thing London neglects facts. He put in writing the exact point at which a public man erred. Ninth, the motive? Not lucre alone, though contracts fatten. It was pride, this city's and a gentleman's, wedded to impatience. Sir Godfrey believes he is London. He could not forgive a laugh at his figures any more than London forgives a hold upon its breath. He mistook a rebuke for a revolt. He set down the poker. This is the stair. You may walk it down before the coroner and back before the jury and not lose your footing. Lestrade had the air of a man who will not admit how much he is relieved to be given the path he might have found with more pain. He rose, thrust out his hand in that awkward yard fashion that is all the prettier because it is rare, and said, "You have made it plain. You always do. I shall ask you to write it, Doctor." Holmes waved his fingers. "Watson will lift the parade to a decent march. Only do not let your betters persuade you that Polish is proof of innocence. We have had 2 days' lesson in the contrary." When Lestrade had gone, leaving behind a smell of wet wool and duty, Holmes returned to his kipper and, as was his practice when the thing in hand was done, ate with a placidity that would have shocked those who consider him a creature of pure nerves. "Lady Fortescue?" I asked. "I sent boy to her with a line at midnight," he replied. "This morning he will carry her husband's papers back with an explanation of 2 sentences. I did not repeat the word laugh." "You are sometimes tender, Holmes." "I am practical," he returned. "There are truths which help and truths which flog. I have no use for the latter until the day men decide to enjoy penitence." He glanced towards the shelf where his monographs leaned like a regiment. "I shall add a note on Polish. On the tendency of men of office to carry their vanity to the places their shoes go," he said, with a twinkle. "It may yet save a life." We sat for a while in that companionable silence which is the best reward of dangerous labour. The street below carried on its eternal murmuring. At last I asked, "What will become of Harcourt?" "If he is wise," Holmes said, "he will become a clerk in a counting-house that balances tea and candles, and never again touches a figure that runs under arches. If he is foolish, he will become a pamphleteer. There is always a seat for such. As for Mallows, he will argue in the dock that he engineered only air. He will discover that a jury knows the difference between breath and breath's denial. Sir Godfrey will make a speech, magnificent, and then discover that a speech is not a stare." "And you?" I said. He smiled and reached for his violin. "I shall go back to the Roman emperors for an hour. There is a passage in Tacitus where a man confounds the Senate with a necessity and calls it virtue. I think I could play it." He set the instrument to his shoulder and drew a phrase so thin and biting that it might have been cut from the morning air. "After which," he added, "if Mrs. Hudson can find a hot breakfast for a chemist and a boy, we shall give them something better than lozenges and coin." The beau paused. He looked out, his profile black against the pale, and the old sardonic humour softened. "Under London's shadows," he said, "men are always tempted to think they may do in secret what would offend in the light. But the earth, like the city, remembers. It takes a mark, like fresh wax. One has only to know where to warm it." He lowered the violin. "You may put that at the end of your case, Watson. It will read like philosophy, and no harm if our public takes it for such." I promised him I would, and so it was that the matter of Sir Julius Fortescue, which had begun with a body upon ancient clay and a smell like a summer storm in a crypt, closed in our rooms with the sound of a violin and a remark that was half jest, half law. I have recorded worse epitaphs and fewer useful lessons. The trial of the Crown versus Pym and others opened before the end of the month, and for once London turned its gaze from scandals of pleasure to a scandal of principle. Sir Godfrey Pym stood in the dock with all his habitual grace, his head high, his ring still on his finger, and the old air of public service about him. He conducted his own defence at intervals, assisting his counsel with whispered notes that gleamed like silver hooks cast into dark water. But as Holmes had predicted, the chain of evidence, though delicate, was unbreakable, the polish upon the iron, the silk from his cuff, the fragment of gold dust caught in the waxen smear, and, most damning of all, the timetable with his neat underlining beside Sir Julius's fatal notation. When Mallows took the stand, he was a shadow of the brisk, self-assured engineer we had first encountered in the Strand. His confession, delivered with a strange dignity, betrayed neither malice nor cowardice. Sir Godfrey said the man's delay would ruin half the works, he told the court. He said that London's air was worth one man's breath. I had no wish to see Sir Julius dead, but I did not believe he could die so easily. The words fell into that charged silence peculiar to rooms where conscience stirs behind wooden benches. Harcourt followed, his youth worn to transparency. He confirmed every step of the deception, and when the judge asked him if he had gained by it, he answered, "Only in fear, my lord, I shall never be without it." Holmes, seated beside Lestrade, leaned forward a little at that and murmured to me, "There, Watson, you see the price of obedience in its cheapest form." The verdict was inevitable. Mallows was sentenced to death, though it was widely whispered that Holmes's private word, with the Home Secretary, softened the punishment to life's hard shadow. Harcourt was released, under bond, and soon after vanished into some colonial post where, as Holmes said, his lungs may draw cleaner air. But Sir Godfrey Pym, his condemnation was the talk of every club and counting-room for a fortnight. The once praised reformer of the city's arteries was now its poisoner, and his name passed like a smudge across the morning papers until it disappeared altogether, as if London itself wished to forget it had ever trusted him. On the morning after the verdict, Holmes and I walked by the embankment. The river moved slow and thick under a pewter sky, and the smell that rose from the grates along the wall had that same curious sweetness which had clung to the fleet works, the perfume, one might say, of the city's own secrets. Holmes paused where the water lapped against the granite. "Do you know, Watson," he said quietly, "I never loved London more than when it tried to kill itself. Observe how honest it is. It hides nothing. It merely forgets." He turned his collar up against the wind and continued, "The Pym case will not reform the board, nor make a single tunnel safer. But it may remind a few that figures and faith are not the same thing. Fortescue saw that truth and laughed. It was his laughter that condemned him. Men like Pym cannot endure laughter. It tells them they are human." We walked on in silence until we reached Blackfriars Bridge, and there Holmes leaned upon the parapet, looking down where the tide turned sluggishly among the piles. "You recall the boy with the tarred cap?" he asked. "He is apprenticed now at the telegraph office. I gave him the sixpence again, properly earned this time. I dare say he will send us our next summons before long." I smiled. "And you, Holmes? What next? Will you take another case?" He drew out his pipe, striking a match against the stone, and the flame showed for an instant the fine, ascetic lines of his face. "Another? Inevitably. London breeds enigmas as readily as it breeds fog, yet this one was singular. Few crimes begin with air and end with shadow. It pleased me as an exercise in logic, but I confess, Watson, there was a moral in it that chills even me, which is that the purest intellect, if divorced from conscience, will justify anything, even murder, so long as it names it progress. The city's filth is not in its sewers, but in its motives. He puffed a slow wreath of smoke, watching it dissolve into the mist above the river. Then, with a sudden brightness returning to his manner, he flicked the ash from his sleeve. But enough of sermons. Mrs. Hudson will be lamenting that her eggs congeal. And there are 3 newspapers on my desk that assure me of fresh villainy in the world. Come, my dear fellow, the city waits. We turned back toward Baker Street, the air sharp, the pavement shining like obsidian under the morning's drizzle. As we walked, I could not help but glance once more toward the river. Beneath its dull surface flowed the invisible network of tunnels and drifts that had nearly buried truth itself. And above, in the thin light of day, 2 figures moved steadily through the mist, one whose faith was reason, and another whose faith was in him. And thus ended the affair of Under London's shadows. Sleep's a deadly secret, a case that proved, as so many before it, that beneath even the foulest depths of the city's labyrinths there runs, unseen but certain, the bright current of justice, guided, as ever, by the keen mind of Sherlock Holmes.